All right. All right, well, good afternoon, and thank you for joining today's Central Mass CPCU Lunch and Learn virtual event. My name is Matt Auger. I'm the president of the Central Mass CPCU chapter. And today I'm excited to announce our presenter, Traci Adedeji, who's the president of the Rhode Island CPCU chapter. Just a quick little note, she's actually going to be presenting at this year's Inter-Risk annual event as well. So lucky us, we got some high power presenters today, high power presenters. Looking forward to the discussion. Before we start, I would like to go over just a few quick housekeeping items, just to make sure everyone has the best experience that they can for the event. If you've not already done so, please be sure just to mute your audio during the presentation. That's just to avoid any excessive background noise. We do encourage questions, however, but we just ask that you feel free to use the chat function during the event for any questions that you may have or like to have answered by our speaker. If you're not familiar with the chat function, simply scroll your mouse down to the bottom of the screen and a toolbar should pop up. And on that toolbar is an icon with a word bubble displayed. Just click on the icon and the chat feature should open up. You can simply type your question in to everyone, or you can send it to myself. And we will actively monitor the chat function just to see what questions are coming in. If we're unable to get to all the questions, which could happen, we'll be sure to post those answers to the questions on our chapter website. This event will be recorded and subsequently may be posted to a chapter website. Most likely will be. So just keep that in mind. You can feel free to turn your video camera off, no problem, just as an FYI. Please remember, if you did not provide your full first and last name when you logged into the Zoom, you're going to need to provide that to us in order to receive the CE for CPCU credits. If you would not like to get CE for CPCU credits, we just ask that you let us know in the chat function, because we try to track people down just to make sure and check if they want it or not. So if you let us know that you don't, it would just save a little bit of time. Sue Scavera is going to provide her email in the chat, so you can reach out to her as needed with your information, your first and last name if you need to do it. But with that said, let's meet our speaker today, and that is Traci. Traci, good to see you.
Good to see you as well. Really excited to be here with you today. Give me 1 second to get myself situated because I was making insurance magic happen this morning, so I had a lot of screens open here.
No worries.
All right, so what I am going to do is I am going to go ahead, if I may, and share my screen.
Yep, please do.
And where is my little share screen icon? I'm so used to Teams that, give me 1 second here. Traci, no, that's not it.
Is it at the bottom of your screen there where it says participants chat and share? Do you show that?
Oh, yeah, yep.
Look at that. All right, let me know when you can see my screen.
Looks good, I see it.
All right, excellent. All right, so usually when I present, I like to have interaction because anyone who knows me, and Matt will tell you, I talk a lot. But in the interest of time, because I am sensitive to the fact that this is lunchtime for a lot of us, I want to make sure that we get through all of the material as I've prepared it. So I'm going to stick to my script to the extent that I can. And in doing so, that allows us to make sure that we've got a nice chunk of time at the end for questions and conversation, because that conversation is really the most important part of this. So as Matt said, he's going to quarterback for me and he's going to monitor the chat. And we'll have some chit chat at the end, some conversation. What I would also say is that this is just the start of a conversation, and you'll hear me say that again. Please feel free to connect to me on LinkedIn. Get my email address. I'm happy to share the links that I use as resources for this presentation, but also just to have a conversation on the subject matter. So when I created this presentation, I wrestled quite a bit with what the focus should be. And then I saw that the National Association of Insurance Commissioners was confronting the issue of race in our industry head on. So it inspired me to follow suit. We spend about a third of our time at work, so it made sense to focus on interactions in the workplace. And keep in mind, though, that many of the ideas that we're going to discuss today could easily be applied to any interaction that involves diverse people, since diversity isn't just about race. So before we dive into the presentation, what I'd like to do is take a moment and tell you what this presentation is not. It's not intended to be comfortable. Racial tension in the current climate in our country is very uncomfortable. People of color are tired, we're angry, we're frustrated, and we're afraid. We're tired of the need to conform to corporate culture in the way we show up at work. This could be as basic as the way we wear our hair to as complex as the way we respond to conflict in the workplace. We're angry at the seemingly perpetual trauma from images of Black people being treated like they're less than human, and we're frustrated from feeling like we're expected to do all the emotional labor required to resolve this issue. We're also afraid for the well-being of our loved ones. There are many people, particularly, people who have sons, who live daily with the very real concern that their child might not make it home at the end of the day. But no situation is one-sided. I would imagine that white people are also frustrated and probably a little confused. Frustrated because sometimes it seems like everything that you say to a person of color gets perceived as racist or could land you in a viral video. And perhaps confused because there are a lot of people who felt that once we had a Black president, we'd automatically been transported to a post-racial era. This conversation is not intended to be a poor Black people, why won't everyone be nice to us, or even a let's beat up on white people session. The fact that we've all taken the time to be here today says that we get it. We know that there's a problem. So platitudes and pretty pictures would probably be a waste of everyone's time. We're really here today to reach a deeper level of understanding about racial interaction and hopefully walk away with actionable items that allow us all to be part of the solution. And as I mentioned earlier, it's also not intended to be a final conversation. We didn't get to where we are overnight, and there is no magic wand that can be waved that'll just make everything okay. This is the start of a conversation that needs to continue as long as it needs to. As people who care, that conversation should never really end because we should always be seeking ways that we can be kinder and more compassionate to each other. So even though I can't see you, I'm going to ask you to raise your hand if you've ever participated in a DEI presentation that focused on various types of diversity within that one presentation. And then I'm going to ask you to raise your other hand if you've ever participated in a presentation with messaging that we're more alike than we're different and puts forth the idea that we would all get along if we'd only focus on what makes us alike instead of how we're different. And I'm pretty sure that there's some raised hands out there. Both of those ideas are very well intentioned, but my mom always told me when I was growing up that the road to hell is paved with good intentions. Both approaches have merit, but neither presents a real and equitable solution. But there's one other thing that I'd really like you to think about. There's something dismissive about lumping all marginalized groups together that's contrary to the spirit of what a DEI strategy is really all about. So who's heard of Jane Elliott? Jane Elliott is an educator who's famous for her Brown Eyes Blue experiment. It was conducted over 50 years ago, and it was intended to educate children about prejudice. And this quote of hers, in my opinion, cuts to the core of why we struggle so much with racial diversity. So I'm going to take a moment and read it. When you say to a person of color, when I see you, I don't see Black. I don't see you Black. I just see everybody the same. Think about that. You don't have the right to say to a person, I don't see you as you are. I want to see you as I would be more comfortable seeing you. We're going to talk a little bit about the idea of culture, but a thought I want to park here for a moment is that culture is dictated by the power dynamic of an organization, and those who are not in a position of power have no choice but to conform if they want to remain a part of that culture. So let's put a pin in that for a moment because we are going to come back to it. So some people may be asking, why do we need to discuss race in the workplace? We're here to do a job. It doesn't matter, Black, white, it shouldn't matter. I started my insurance career back in 1984. And back then there wasn't much emphasis on work-life balance, on diversity, or employee engagement. You were expected to do a job in the corporate environment. We always made the joke about how everybody had to wear a navy blue suit, the white full blouse, the guys had to wear the red tie, and that type of thing. If we fast forward to 2021, the ways that an organization engages its employees is a lot different now. An organization's corporate culture, including how they treat their employees, impacts the way they're perceived in the marketplace, which impacts their business results. Many corporate cultures are much more relaxed today. We're allowed to wear business casual attire to work. Some of us have flex time, and even before COVID, many of us were allowed to work from home. The general idea is that happy employees are loyal and productive employees. And it's not uncommon for organizations to regularly distribute employee satisfaction surveys. There are even external organizations that compile data and certify businesses as a great place to work. I work at APSO, and we actually, they were all over the place, with excitement that we've been certified again as a great place to work. But let's look at a few statistics. Ethnically diverse teams are 36% more likely to be profitable. And if you think about it, this makes sense. Think about the loss of market share a company would face if their products and services didn't resonate with today's more diverse customer base. In order to know how best to market to and engage diverse customers, an organization has to have diverse employees. And that includes diverse thought at the decision-making table. So that makes the next two statistics a little disheartening. That Black, Native American, and Latinx women earn 25% less than white men. And 61% of workers have witnessed or experienced workplace discrimination. So let that settle in for a moment. 61% of workers have either witnessed or experienced workplace discrimination. So now let's dip back to the idea of culture. As I mentioned earlier, culture is determined by the power dynamic. Those in the majority determine what's acceptable, and everyone else has no choice but to defer to it in order to remain a part of the culture. And I'm going off script a little bit here with this, is that, and it really isn't, it's something that isn't always crystal clear, right? It could be a matter of decisions about who gets promotions, right? It could be a matter of who gets selected for certain projects. And there could be that it factor that nobody really understands why someone is not being put forth for certain things. And it usually has to do with how liked this person is, and how liked that person is usually a function of how similar they are to the person who's making the decision. So culture informs how we show up at work. It's essentially a way of interacting that's proprietary to that group, and it implies a degree of conformity with the values of the group. In the workplace, that culture is communicated formally as the organization's vision and mission statements, and the vision and mission statements get translated into the company's policies and procedures. This is communicated informally in the way employees interact with each other. And the litmus test for that is what kind of behavior is supported by what's said, but maybe more importantly, by what's not said. So I want us all to take a moment, it's kind of rhetorical questions, but just give some thought to, does your company have a formal policy regarding diversity? Then I want you to think about how many people of color work within your organization. And of those people, how many of them hold leadership positions? How many of them work in your department, on your team? How many of them are people that you interact with regularly? So although a corporation is a legal entity, it's made up of people. So I'd also like you to take a moment and think about the people that you work with, the people who live in your neighborhood, and the people with whom you choose to socialize. Think about how many of those people don't look like you, and how many of those people don't think the way you do. It's perfectly normal for people to gravitate toward people who are like them, that look like them, think like them, communicate like them, because the familiar is comfortable to us. But that comfort is part of the problem. When we isolate ourselves from people who look and think differently than we do, when we're unwilling or unable to process ideas that counter to our own, we cultivate an environment in which stereotype and misinformation grow like weeds and continue to separate us from each other. So think about the idea specific to race, that if you don't know any Black people in your personal life, if you don't have any authentic connections with people of color, The only information you're going to have about any cultural differences are going to be what you see on TV, what you read in the media. So just give that some thought. So since corporations are comprised of people, we can see how a lack of diversity in our personal lives can fuel a lack of diversity in the organizations that we lead. It's human nature to surround ourselves with people who make us comfortable. This influences hiring and promotion decisions in the workplace. But true leadership is self-aware enough to intentionally invite diversity into the circle of influence. So for purposes of this discussion, you are going to hear me reference to Black Lives Matter. And I know that that's a very volatile phrase and can be very polarizing. But I want you to understand that when I say Black Lives Matter, I'm talking about the movement or the concept. In other words, the ideology that Black Lives Matter, not the organization called Black Lives Matter. So I just want to level set about that. On May 25th, 2020, 46-year-old George Floyd was arrested by police in Minneapolis, Minnesota. During that arrest, Officer Derek Chauvin restrained Mr. Floyd by pressing his knee on his neck for 8 minutes and 46 seconds, resulting in his death. That horrifying video was widely circulated on the internet, and it was a tipping point that escalated the Black Lives Matter movement. To be clear, George Floyd's death is by no means an isolated incident of an unarmed person of color being killed. It was again just a tipping point that had people, and not just people of color, saying that enough is enough. Protests have taken place all across the country and actually across the world. Some have been peaceful and some have been not so peaceful. Speaking personally, I am probably the most nonviolent person on the face of the earth. I have never had a physical confrontation with anyone in my life. So if any of us ever were together and got into a dangerous situation, I'm not the chick you want to look at to protect you. But although I'm a nonviolent person, I understand. Anybody who knows me knows that I love a good analogy, so I'm going to use one here that I hope illustrates my point. Let's pretend for a moment that you're in a place where no one around you understands you when you speak. Imagine now that you're faced with a situation that is literally life and death, and you're trying to explain the criticality of that situation. And again, those around you lack either the desire or the ability to understand you. Think about what lengths you might go to in order to call attention to a situation that jeopardizes your life or that of your loved ones. That's what it feels like to be a person of color trying to explain the urgency of this issue. And again, I'm not condoning violent protests. I'm just saying that I understand the frustration that fans those flames. In the wake of this revolution, many companies have stepped up in meaningful ways to help make a change. They've donated money to causes that support Black excellence and creation of opportunities for the disenfranchised. They've taken their own gut checks to make sure that they're walking the walk and not just talking the talk. And many have done the thing that costs them nothing, but that means so very much. They've simply said to the people of color within their organizations, we see you and we care. I can't stress enough that this is a very volatile issue and is without question a very uncomfortable topic to broach. And if I had a company, I can see where I would feel like, okay, well, I don't want to address this. This doesn't have anything to do with our work. But the reality is that it does, right? That if you have employees within your organization who are dealing with this type of trauma, right? If you don't address the fact that it can impact how they show up at work, then you're not accepting the whole person, right? And when an organization publicly and unequivocally states that their understanding and support of the sentiment that Black lives do indeed matter, people of color feel seen and we feel included. And that's really the first step toward healing. It would have been very easy for companies to issue vague statements about supporting their employees of color, but not specifically calling out why they support them in this moment. And honestly, that's worse than remaining silent, which leads us to the next topic. God bless you. Virtue signaling is the equivalent of what sports fans would call being a bandwagon fan. Virtue signaling is when a person or organization publicly takes a position on something, not because they feel strongly about it, but because they want to be on trend with the issue or because they want to capitalize on it. It's exploitation, pure and simple, and it's a byproduct of and while a byproduct of this exploitation may be that it helps raise awareness, it's still no substitute for a meaningful diversity, equity, and inclusion strategy. We often see the words diversity, equity, and inclusion together. And some of you, if you've participated in any DEI presentations recently, you've probably seen this graphic, right? And although each word is represented separately, many people treat them as one concept. But it's important to understand that diversity, equity, and inclusion are not the same thing. Diversity just is. It exists whether we call it out or not. This world is made up of different genders, ethnicities, sexual orientations, religious beliefs, and even differences in which hand we write with. So raise your hand if you've ever worked on a project and tried to resolve an issue at work and you've reached out to someone else to get their point of view. And I want you to think about why you would do that. It's likely because you agree that the best decisions are made when diverse points of view are considered. Organizations that fail to embrace diversity miss out on the competitive advantage that comes from being able to see and evaluate a situation from all perspectives. So while diversity exists organically, equity and inclusion require intentional action in order to benefit from and show respect to diversity. Equity happens when those in power level the playing field so that everyone has the same opportunity to be successful. Inclusion happens when organizational leadership includes diverse voices in positions of power and when new ideas are welcomed and not silenced. So think of it this way. Diversity ensures that our organization is a reflection of the real world. Equity ensures that everyone within our organization is treated fairly. In other words, they're not held back because they're different. Inclusion gives agency to the people who make up our organization to be vocal about diversity and equity and to participate in shaping the future of the organization. So by now, we're probably all aware that the golden rule has been replaced by the platinum rule. But I always got to take it up a notch, and I found the Platinum Plus rule. The idea of treating people the way they would like to be treated has been refined with the Platinum Plus rule to ask that we treat people the way their best self would want our best self to treat them. This rule is asking that we strive toward an ideal and interact with each other on a higher plane. I've always believed that people will rise to the level of your expectations of them. It's urgently important that we give people the opportunity, to do what's right instead of interacting with them from a place of hurt that automatically expects them to do wrong. And doing the work to gain deeper, authentic understanding of each other is the key. This builds trust and it facilitates open communication. Okay? So I'm hoping you're still following me here because right now we're going to do what one of my favorite radio personalities, Joe Madison, says, and we're going to put it where the goats can get it. I love that expression. I giggle every time he says it. If we're going to truly discuss bridging our racial differences, we have to discuss the behaviors that represent blockers to progress. We need to discuss microaggressions, code switching, and we need to talk about what real allyship looks like. So what's a microaggression? In short, a microaggression is a manifestation of prejudice, discrimination, and bias. And it comes in 3 varieties: micro-assaults, micro-insults, and micro-invalidations. And we're going to talk about each of those separately. So micro-assault is your garden variety racism. It's the use of racial slurs. It's refusing to sit next to or get onto an elevator with someone of another race. It's the telling of off-color, racially insensitive jokes. And I would also argue that it is not speaking up if someone else says something off-color or racially insensitive. It's comments like telling people to leave this country. It's often intentionally hurtful, and there's no doubt about what it is. And I'm about to date myself here, but the classic example would be the outrageous behavior of Archie Bunker from the old TV series All in Family. Micro-insults are those comments, sometimes innocent, that demean a person's racial identity. The fact that they are unintentional is what makes them so insidious. And examples of micro insults are not taking the time to learn how to properly pronounce a person of color's name. And Matt, I would have given you a big hug when we were talking the other day and you asked me to share with you how to pronounce my name. And I always use my last name as an example when I discuss this. My last name is Adedeji. It's an African name that's pronounced phonetically just like it's spelled. And I have been in situations where an American person has mangled my name, but they don't have any problem pronouncing an Eastern European name that's not pronounced phonetically. Not making the effort to at least try to learn how to pronounce someone's name is at best lazy and is at worst dismissive and disrespectful. I've even seen people tell someone, well, I'll just call you, and then they insert some nickname that they made up. So that's very disrespectful. Telling a person of color that you don't see color. Very well intentioned, and I get it, right? But if you tell a person of color, a Black person, I don't see you as Black, I just see you as a person, what you're saying is, I don't see your struggles. I don't see that the way you interact here at work may need to be a little different because of other people's unconscious biases. And then finally, backhanded compliments that suggest surprise about a positive attribute. So here's a little story break for you. I was with a group of women from work. We have a book club at work, and I was the only woman of color in the group. And the conversation turned politics, and Senator Cory Booker's name came up. And one of the women commented saying, oh, he's so articulate. And inside I was thinking to myself, here we go. So while I'm sure that she meant it as a compliment, I just want to point out that in addition to being a U.S. Senator, Cory Booker is a Stanford-educated Rhodes Scholar. So pointing out that he's articulate is like pointing out that water is wet. And I really gave this some thought. I can honestly say that I don't recall ever in my life hearing a white person talk about another white person and gush about how articulate or well-spoken they are. And there was another story that I wanted to tell you about that, but I'm going to hold that until the end. So those would be examples of micro insults. A micro invalidation is a form of microaggression that excludes someone's feelings or thoughts. So example of a micro invalidation would be comments like telling someone that they're being overly sensitive in the face of a micro assault or micro insult. Citing the fact that you have friends of a certain ethnicity as proof that you're not racist. And conflating. For example, if a white woman suggests that the discrimination she may have suffered is the same as that a person of color has endured, that doesn't take away from the challenges that women face in the workplace, but using that to kind of minimize what a person of color experiences, like in response to it, is a microaggression, and the variety of microaggression that it is a micro invalidation. And the classic one is responding to Black Lives Matter with the response that all lives matter. Black Lives Matter is not a statement of exclusion. It is a statement of focus. And logic tells us that unless you're saying that Black lives don't count, when you say all, it's not possible that all lives matter. Another behavior that it's important to understand is code switching. Code switching is a process of adjusting your speech, your appearance, or your behavior to fit in. Now, there's going to naturally be a degree of behavioral adaptation required of everyone in the workplace. Like, you can't be at work with your feet up on the desk and stuff like that, right? But at face value, it can be argued that being able to flex your communication style to be effective in different environments is a talent, right? It's something that serves you well. But when you have to show up in an inauthentic way in order to achieve success, it can be exhausting, it can be frustrating, and can actually lead to depression. And it once again promotes behavior that is counter to the diversity that we say we want to embrace. I do think that this is where trust born out of open communication comes in. Conflict that exists because of diversity is a function of a lack of understanding. It goes back to the idea of being comfortable with what's familiar and fearing or rejecting what's unfamiliar. I've often shared with people the idea that as a statuesque Black woman, and I don't know how many of you have met me in person, but I'm not a small person. I'm about 6'2" in heels, and I'm a pretty good sized girl, right? But as a statuesque Black woman, I don't have the luxury of having a visceral response to situations at work that I feel strongly about. A man can be very assertive and say what he wants to say, and he would be called confident and he's assertive. A white woman, if she does that, would probably be called bitchy, right? And I would be called angry, and that perceived anger would be perceived as a threat. So I've learned to be mindful of my tone, my timing, and my word choice when I communicate, when I'm unhappy about something or feel strongly about something in the workplace. And after 30 plus years in the workplace, that process is pretty much on autopilot. But there are times that I, like many people of color, grow exhausted from feeling like we're always the ones that have to accommodate the bad behavior of others because of their unconscious bias. Now, I'm not saying that to suggest that we should be able to be at work yelling and screaming and acting a fool, but if we form those authentic connections, then we learn to receive information in the spirit in which it's given, right? Open communication and getting to truly know each other as individuals with all of our nuances and difference leads to understanding in most cases. I'm fortunate to work for a boss, many of you know him, Jeff Cook, who's created a safe space for me to express myself openly. There are times that I'm like about to flip furniture about something, and I can go into his office and I can close the door and I can say what I want to say, how I want to say it, because he's taken the time to get to know me as a person. So any impassioned response that I might have to a situation is not going to be perceived as Traci's being the angry Black woman. It would be understood as Traci is concerned about this specific situation. And given her level of aggression, I guess I'll say, in speaking, tells him like, okay, this is a really big deal for her, so we need to try to figure this out. So the other little story that I wanted to tell you is a woman that I work with who is just one of the kindest, sweetest people I've ever met in my life. She's the type of person that it like makes me want to do what I can to be a better person because I'm nowhere near as nice as she is. And I did this presentation for the Rhode Island chapter, and she attended. And after the presentation, she came up to me and she apologized for commenting that I was well spoken. And I could not for the life of me remember her ever saying that to me. So when she reminded me of the instance when she said that, I said, well, you've just illustrated my point. You and I know each other. You and I have a relationship. I feel like I know who you are as a person. I have respect for you. I know who you are, but behind the emails, right? As such, I wouldn't be predisposed to take anything that you say to me offensively because I wouldn't think that you meant it that way. And she got the point that I was trying to make there. But that again is just illustrating the point of if you form those authentic relationships with people, not only are you not going to have as many of those kinds of misunderstandings, right? But you're also in a position to educate each other. Which brings us to the final point, which is allyship. The relationship I share with my boss is an example of what allyship looks like. So strictly defined, allyship is an association for a common purpose. It has really felt good to see white people stepping up to be part of the solution. It's not enough for people of color to advocate for ourselves. Everyone has to advocate for what's right. So some things that people can do are they can read. There's no lack of information available on the concepts that we've covered here today. And implicit in that is that you shouldn't expect the people of color in your circle to bear the full burden of educating you. You have to do the work. And there's a saying, because I love good sayings and good analogies, that I can explain it to you, but I can't understand it for you. You can examine the diversity in both your personal and professional networks. Examine the diversity of your LinkedIn feed. If everyone on your timeline looks like you and you never ever see a post that you disagree with, it's probably time to branch out. And you can start by connecting with the people of color within our CPCU network. And I'm always looking for new connections on LinkedIn. You can challenge the status quo. If there are no people of color in leadership roles in your place of employment, you can question your organization's commitment to diversity, equity, and inclusion. I would challenge you to examine whatever position your company has put out publicly about diversity, equity, and inclusion, and compare that, use that as a barometer for what is actually happening within your organization. And if there is discordance, if there's a disconnect between those two things, call it out. The other thing you can do is to form a two-way mentoring relationship with a person of color. Whether we want to accept it or not, being white does come with privilege. Use that privilege to open a door for a person of color. It could mean being a mentor either formally or informally. It could mean making an introduction that would be beneficial to that person. But it's also an opportunity for you to form an authentic bond with someone who is different from you and challenge any stereotypes and unconscious bias that you're moving through life with. So this is a list of links to some of the resources that I used in putting this presentation together. I'm certainly happy to share this list with you. This New York Times list is probably the one I would most highly recommend. It's a series of books and articles, but all just really good information. This TED Talk I thought was really great as well. But that's it for the formal presentation. I really thank you all for your time and participation. I'm going to stop sharing my screen, and then I'm certainly happy to answer any questions or engage in any conversation that anyone is interested in, about this presentation. And let me also say that I'm interested in honest conversation, right? It's all well and good, like, oh, it's a great presentation, really liked it, If there was something in it that didn't resonate with you or that you didn't like, we should talk about that. So I'm going to stop talking. I love to talk, but I'm going to stop talking now and turn the floor over to you all to see if there's any questions or anything you'd like to comment on.
Yeah, I'll jump in really quick. So we don't have any questions, I don't think, in the chat. But that being said, of course, I'm going to jump in. But I have some of my own, but I'll defer to anyone else first that we have on the line before I jump in.
Actually, I have a question.
Yeah. Right.
Tracy, I'm curious. This came up, actually, it was the result of a Facebook post. Mm-hmm. And I was talking to a girlfriend of mine, she's Black, mm-hmm. and it was talking about quotas it wasn't a workplace, it was with a school. Mm-hmm. Kids had to apply and things like that. And she was saying that as a Black woman, that she would find it very offensive if her child were selected to the school over another child simply based on race. Mm-hmm. Maybe grades were a little lower. She wanted her children judged on their merits. Yeah. And a lot of that, we see it all the time. You apply for anything, a discount card at CVS or something, and you're supposed to check the box. And how long does the box still have a benefit?
So that's a tricky question, right? So on one hand, if you think about, and let me just preface this by saying that anything that I say today is my personal opinion, right? If we think about the concept of systemic racism, all right, and we think about the idea that there are, in schools in particular, right? If you look at the way communities are set up, and then you look at the way resources are allocated to those schools, you could find yourself in a situation where there's a school with a really excellent program that because a child doesn't live in that community, and it's probably not the best example, but let's say there was a program that wasn't specific to maybe school, but if there was an opportunity, right, that a person of color, child of color would not have access to because they're not in that community, because their parents don't know the people that are making the decisions, there's value in making sure that there's equity in the way that program is applied, right? So affirmative action type things, quotas, are really intended to force equity, right? I have my opinions about the value because and my children are adults now, grown, degrees, all of that. And I was the type of parent that I was going to make sure my kids got what they got because they had earned it. So I kind of mirror your friend's thoughts that I don't want my kid to get something because they were filling a quota. I want them to get it because they earned it. If we translate that to the workplace, if you have two candidates for the same job, you shouldn't hire the person who is not going to be as great at the job because they're a person of color. You do a disservice to the organization. You do a disservice to the people who have earned that opportunity, regardless their color, right? But if you got them equally matched and they both would do an awesome job, and you don't have diversity in your program, in your organization, that might be the tipping point, right? We have to treat that type of thing, or we have to use it very judiciously, but we also have to do the work in the back end to change our culture as a country so that those types of programs are not necessary. And that's the work that nobody talks about. And that's the work that, like, it's very easy to just not do it. So I don't know if that answered your question, but
It does. Thank you. I was wondering what your thoughts were on it.
I appreciate that question.
I love the way you stated that too, Tracy, when you said you got two people who are equal, and you're looking at it saying, all right, in the current situation, but the need for diversity, because like you said, we have my organization here, we're not overly diverse either, but it's good to have that. So if you don't, and they're on equal footing, it would make sense to go for the diverse candidate versus the regular one. And I think sometimes, this is my own opinion, I'll just jump in, but I think sometimes we get away from seeing that because we see all different things, and the media sometimes drives the narrative and people talking, and I think sometimes people don't think it works that way. Like, the point about the box, Kathy, was a great one. So you think, oh, geez, it's just going that way because of that only. But the way you just talked about it, I wish people would talk about it more often that way, to say, no. I mean, you got two people who are equal. It's, diversity needs to happen, and we need to get it to happen because we're not comfortable with it. Because it's human nature, you like to put things in boxes. You don't really understand what you don't understand. It's not like you. So that was a great way to put it, actually. My own opinion. I appreciate it.
Hi, it's Jen Morton. I have a question too. How are you, Tracy?
Good, so good to see you.
I know, it's nice to see you too. I've enjoyed this presentation very much. But I have a question. You kind of are encouraging white people to go out and become friends. So let me first start by saying where I live, where I work, it is not diverse. There are not a lot of people of color or different races or nationalities. So I feel personally like to seek out a Black person just to be friends with them is offensive.
Yeah, and that is fair. that's fair. But what I would counter that with is, if you just walk up to somebody that you don't know and say, hey, I want to be your friend because you're Black, right? That wouldn't be a thing. But okay, look at the two of us. We have our connection through CPCU, right? So you already have a connection with a person of color, right? So that, like, you use the resources that you have to get the exposure that you need. And I could name, not to cut you off, but I could name easily 5 or 10 other people that would happy to be your friend because you're a lovely person. So.
Well, thank you. But so I'll just say my personal philosophy is that, and I just took some training seminar for work, but it's interesting because we had to do this sort of, process and thinking about, and we've probably all done that little, who's in your group, and most of the people in my this was your personal group, right? They're like me. They're a similar age, a similar race. But when I think about at work, I prefer to surround myself with people who are not like me because I know what I know. I need to know what they know. It makes me better. And I think more people need to think like that because I truly believe that as a team and as a group, we can accomplish so much more. And if we're surrounded by people who are just like us, we'll never learn more or grow. And so I really think that it's important to surround ourselves by people who know things or are different than us because they bring a different perspective, and they make you think, and they challenge what you know. So this has been really great. And thank you for joining our chapter. I really appreciate it.
Well, I appreciate the invitation.
All good stuff. Any other questions or things that people would like to bring up? Oh, looks like it's pretty quiet. Oh, Paul.
Tracy, I just one of the questions I was going to ask, and I'm not sure how I'm going to phrase this the right way, but your example of the woman who made a comment about, you're well-spoken and how it didn't offend you. Absent her knowing you and you knowing her, how do you advise someone like me who is really very uncomfortable in these conversations because I'm so afraid of offense without meaning to? So in that situation, I could see myself saying something like that, and you don't know me, and now I'm offensive. But and so how do you navigate that? Because you can't have a personal relationship with everyone you interact with.
And that's fair, right? So that's fair. So I think that if my recommendation would be, if you're in a situation where you don't know the person, right, and you want to compliment the presentation, I would do that. I wouldn't compliment the person being well-spoken, because to me personally, if someone's been asked to do a presentation, the fact that they're somewhat articulate and well-spoken is implicit, right? You're not going to invite someone to do that if they're not, if they're not articulate or well-spoken, as I babbled through the answer, right? But, I would say that if there's someone that you don't know, I would try to steer away from that. What I would also say, though, is that in a professional setting, I've been in situations where someone that I don't know has come to me and said that. And deep down, I'm a little offended by it, but I also am the type of person that doesn't automatically go to the negative, right? I would just receive that as this person's trying to pay me a compliment and they don't understand how that would be offensive. If I don't have to interact with that person ever again, or I don't have any type of relationship with them, then it is what it is, water off a duck's back. If it's someone that I'm going to continue to interact with, and if I have any level of investment in that relationship, right, I would probably call that out. And I would probably, like if they said it again, I would probably delicately explain why it's offensive. I know you don't mean it to be offensive, and I'm basically just pulling your coat about it because I don't want you to be in a situation where, you have some negative interaction because someone is not emotionally intelligent enough to receive it as a compliment and keep moving.
Thank you. I appreciate that. I really do.
You're quite welcome. And that's kind of what I meant about, and when I say forming authentic relationships, like you're not, to your point, you're not going to be able to have a deep personal relationship with every person with whom you interact. I mean, there are some people I know whose values and the way they think about things is exactly the way mine are, and I just don't care to interact with them for other reasons, right? But I think that within certain circles, it's having that sensitivity, right? Now that you've heard that could be offensive, you might take a beat before you say that to someone because now you know, right? It's the educating yourself. I mean, that's just really what it is.
Any other questions or things that people want to bring up? It's looking pretty quiet. Feel free. I do have one thing, and I'm going to kind of throw this out there because I'll be honest, I have a tough time with this one on my end. Maybe it's just the way I am, or my personality, or how I try to live my life or whatnot. But I will say the Black Lives Matter is tough on me. And the reason I say it's tough on me, I do get it, and I absolutely agree with it. There's no question on that. But the tough thing I have with it is intrinsically, and maybe this is just me, I do inside feel a little bit like, I feel it feels exclusionary to me somewhat, because I always believe that, black, green, brown, purple, orange, we all matter. We're all well, depending on how you believe, God's children, whatever you want to say, but we're all important people. We're all, our lives are all important. And, you know, I have a tough time with that one. And sometimes I'm sure one day, you know, I look at my kids and they haven't brought it up yet, but at some point I'm wondering if I'm ever going to get the question, my kids, Dad, does my life matter? And of course the answer is no. But I guess it's tough for me, and especially with the media, you know, things that pop out and sometimes they drive the narrative. I just wonder, I don't know, am I missing something on my end with my take on that? And again, I will be the first to say, and I try to be careful because with cancel culture the way it is, I don't want to cause any waves. But am I missing something? And when I say absolutely they do, and they should be supported, and I think I will say part of your presentation when you said you mentioned, you know, someone in your office and understanding what they're dealing with, not just with you but other people, kind of like your actions validate them. It made it easier for me because I'm like, okay, get it. You know, it's a situation where we do need to highlight what's going on. So that helped a little bit, but there's a part of me, I'm like, I wish, and I think Morgan Freeman talked a little bit about this. He did, I saw a great thing on him when he was talking about Black History Month and saying we should just have everybody, you know, everyone should be in History Month. And I'm like, oh, what great stuff.
I get that. And so what I would say is a couple things. I would say that, so when we think about the media, right, and I'm 57 years old, right, so I've been on this earth a nice little chunk of time, right. When I think about the way the news was pre-internet, right, when there was a degree of journalistic integrity with regard to what was disseminated to the masses as news, right? And then I think about the Lord of the Flies thing we got going on now with the internet and news, and, you know, you don't know what's true and what's not. I totally, it gets to a point where it's overkill, right? That like every time you turn around, it's Black Lives Matter, and it's, you know, and I do get that, right? But I think it's important to take a step back from that and look not at where we are, but to look at what got us to where we are, right? If you look at statistics, for example, and look at the number of not even going so deep as the unarmed shootings, right? But if you look at sentencing in our criminal justice system, right? If you look at wage inequity, like there are just so many things that go back so deep into history before any of us was probably even born that are impacting the ability of minorities to really be successful, right? You know, I grew up in Newark, New Jersey, and I've seen, you know, I was that person who was like, well, you know, I went through school and got great grades, and, you know, I did what I needed to do, and you were in the same classroom I was in, why couldn't you just do it too? But there's just so many moving parts to that, right? That it's one of these things where I just want you, as my friend, Matt, to be careful to not let your frustration about the overkill, right? The inundation of Black Lives Matter, to allow that to have your mental or emotional pendulum swing to a point where you don't see why it's like that. You have to kind of sift through it. You've got to sift through the people who are virtue signaling, like I said before, the people who are trying to capitalize on it, the people who are trying to make issues of things that are not issues, and get to the root of what's really going on. You know, for the most part, like, because I'm right now, I'm going through the Leadership Rhode Island program, and that has my mind spinning with, you know, this obligation that I feel I have as a community leader to make a difference. But then when I think about certain things, it just becomes so overwhelming to me. Like, you know, what can I really do? Ultimately, all we can really do is be good people. All we can really do is treat people with kindness and compassion and fairness. All we can do is be respectful of people's differences, right? And all we can really do is, if we see that someone is being mistreated and not being treated fairly, speak up and say something, because that's something that all of us have the power to do. And if everybody does that, it just, I discovered recently that positivity is one of my top 5 Clifton strengths. That if we do that, and I don't want to be like Pollyanna-ish with it, but if we influence what we can influence, that's going to spread out. You know what I mean? I think that this generation of young people is very different. They're a lot more tolerant. They're a lot more, they embrace diversity a lot more, and they speak up about injustice. So I do think that as a country, we're headed in the right direction. Doesn't feel like it all the time, but I feel like we are. I guess to kind of quickly summarize what I'm trying to say in response to you is that I get it, right? Like I get it that it's a lot, and I get it that it can seem overwhelming and at times gratuitous, but just, I implore you to not let that take your eye off of what's really important. And what's really important is that we accept and embrace people as they are. Yes, we want to, we're alike in so many ways because we're all human, but there are differences that we have that make make the way we move in this world different. And if people don't feel that that's understood in the way you engage them, then it's going to hinder that authentic connection that I was talking about.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. That's excellent. I saw Sue, I think, jumped off mute. Do you have a question, Sue? I don't mean to put you on the spot.
Well, sort of. I guess my question would be, what is a more appropriate way to call a Black person, Black or African American? And I say that because I personally think African American is offensive, because not everybody is from Africa. Polish descent, but people don't call me a Polish American. So right. I guess I'm interested in your thoughts.
Personally, I'm fine with either. I self-identify as a Black woman. If someone addressed me as African American, I wouldn't be offended by that. I think it's the same way we treat, the same way we focus on, let's say, like, non-cisgender people and this idea of respecting their pronouns, right? It is kind of the same concept. It's really about, like, you made an excellent point about why you would refer to someone as Black and not African American. So I think that you do what's authentic to you, right? And at whatever point you're interacting with someone and identify that they prefer a different label, then you give them the respect of using the label that they prefer. I think that in a business setting, though, most Black people really don't care one way or the other.
That's a great question. That's one
Yeah,
I can tell you.
Question.
I struggle with that one too on my own. You'd be like, I don't know what I want
Well,
to say.
to me, it's like when people say African American, it's almost like they're uncomfortable and they're kind of like trying to dance around something. Don't make it so tough. Don't make it so difficult.
Well, what's going to happen is that, and if you say I said this out the night, I should make you turn off the recording, is that, I would guess like 10 years from now, somebody's going to come up with some other word, and then that's going to be the new thing. Like it gets to a point where it really gets quite foolish, in my opinion, right? When it really, again, is about respecting each other. That's really what it's about. If whatever it is you say and do is born out of respecting the other person, it's going to be fine.
I just said before, it'd be nice if we could all meet each other and get to know each other. Everyone, like all over, because I think that breaks down a lot of barriers when you get to know someone and you know what they're about. The words, you don't take them off, but they're trying to get across because they don't know how to say it. Then Paul talked a bit about, what do I say? Because it was a good job. And when you know them, it's a lot easier. So I wish we're not all gonna be able to meet each other and get to know each other well, but we can do our best to try to be aware of that. But I think
one quick one, because I know we're getting on time, but the other point I would make is that illustrates why it's important to have diversity in your circle, because this type of conversation that you're having with me, you'd be able to have with any other person of color that's in your personal circle.
Yep, absolutely. Well, great. I think right on 1 o'clock now, so I want to be cognizant of your time, Traci. I absolutely appreciate you coming and doing this for us. I knew it was going to be a great lunch and learn, and it definitely was. So thank you so much. I appreciate it.
Agreed.
thank
This was
everybody.
wonderful. Thank you.
Yeah, thank
You all
for
are my
everyone that-
favorite you're my favorite chapter after Rhode Island, so it's my honor to be here with you today. So
I'll
We
give you that
appreciate it.
$20 bill later on for that.
Yeah, exactly.
Thank you. Yeah, thanks so much, guys. And at that, by all means, look forward to seeing you all in the future. And Tracy, I look forward to talking to you later on this week too.
All right, guys, connect
Thank
with me on
you.
LinkedIn, and everybody have an excellent afternoon.
You as
Thank
well. Have a good one.
Bye bye
too.
now.
Bye-bye.
Thank you, Tracy.
Bye, thank you.